And the last thing that I want to quickly talk about this week is just outliers and missing values, and what they are and how we take care of them. So the first one is what we call an outlier. And an outlier is a value or an entire observation, remember the observations are the rows, that lie outside of the norm. How do you define what an outlier is? It depends. People put together different ways. Some statisticians will say that an outlier is if you're more than 3 standard deviations from the mean, that's an outlier because 99.7% of everything should be in there. It's only a rule of thumb. I think in my PhD dissertation, I defined outliers as anything that was 2 standard deviations more than the mean. So the value itself may not be unusual, but a combination of them may cause some problems, and that's where outliers come, and it's something that you have to look into. So how do I deal with an outlier? Typically, run the analysis with them, run the analysis without them, take a look at the 2 results, see what makes sense, but that's one way to take a look at it. And then, of course, you can remove outliers if things are causing problems. And so the other thing that we'll end up seeing a lot, especially in this class, is we'll deal with missing values. And so most real data sets are going to have gaps in the data. And so what happens is how to detect missing values and what to do about them. And actually in chapter 4, when we're doing cleanup of data, we're going to spend a lot of time when we clean up the data dealing with detecting and finding missing values. So the most important issue is what to do about them. And so there are a couple different ways to do it. One is just to ignore it. Say, okay, we don't have the software there, or sorry, we don't have the value there, we don't want the software to deal with it, so we're just going to simply ignore the value. So there's another way of doing it, and that's actually filling in the value. What can we do? Well, we could use an average, or a median is typically the way that is when you fill in values. It's usually not a good option because it does throw some numbers out of whack because, well, we don't know if it's really going to be the average or the median, and that kind of reduces variability in our data set. And the last thing that we can do is we can kind of examine the missing values and try to figure out what the value is going to be. This happens a lot in date variables. So if you've got like higher dates and you're missing some, look at the higher before, the higher after, and you can kind of piece in sort of close to where it's going to be. Now, dealing with missing values, we're going to talk a lot about this as we're looking at chapter 4, but I did want to bring it up in this beginning part, and that's it. So that's all we have for this week. Remember to get those introduction emails in this week, and I will see you next week where we'll start looking at chapter 3.